Tonight we're in Falkirk, and welcome to Question Time. And a welcome to you at home and to our audience here. On our panel last week, we only had 3 panellists. We're making up for it tonight with 6 panellists. So let me introduce them. Scotland's Deputy First Minister, Nicola Sturgeon of the SNP. From Westminster, the Liberal Democrat Secretary of State for Scotland, Alistair Carmichael. Also from Westminster, Labour's Shadow Scottish Secretary, Margaret Curran. The ex-leader of the Scottish Conservatives here in Holyrood for 6 years, Annabel Goldie. One of the leaders of the Scottish Greens and a member of the Scottish Parliament, Patrick Harvie. And the singer and independence campaigner, Eddi Reader. Thanks very much. So, it's just 10 months or so before Scotland is asked to decide whether it wants independence. This week, the SNP, of course, published its argument for independence. Tonight, we're going to be debating that with an audience that is pretty well divided 50-50 on the issue, evenly split on this issue. So, let's take our first question, and it's from Stephanie Pride, please.
Can Scotland achieve true independence without an independent currency?
Goes to the heart of the independence issue. Can Scotland achieve true independence without an independent currency? Nicola Sturgeon.
Yes, absolutely we can. France and Germany share a currency, but nobody would argue that France and Germany are not both independent countries. I want Scotland to be independent so that we can be responsible for our own decisions, take our own decisions in our best interest, but sometimes those decisions will be to cooperate with others, in particular our friends in other parts of the UK. And a shared currency would not just be in Scotland's best interests, it would also be in the best interests of other parts of the UK. Why do I say that? Well, 2 principal reasons. Firstly, Scotland is the second biggest export market for England, and England is Scotland's biggest export market. So unless we want to incur unnecessary costs for our businesses, it makes sense to stay in the same currency.
What do you say to the argument that John Major put today in a speech?
I don't often agree with John Major's arguments.
No, well, you may not. Well, you may not. But, I mean, he said a currency union, which you assume is negotiable, would require the United Kingdom to underwrite Scottish debts, and that will not happen if Scotland leaves the Union. There'll be no halfway house, no quasi-independence underpinned by the UK institutions. What do you say to that argument?
But that wouldn't be the case, and I would recommend to John Major that he reads the work that was done by the Fiscal Commission that set out in some exhaustive detail how this arrangement would work, and that includes the shared governance arrangements of the Bank of England and what would happen if there was any need, which we all hope there would never be any need for again, to stabilise the financial system and the shared contributions that would be made by Scotland and other parts of the UK. So I don't accept that argument. But the second point I was going to make about why it's the right arrangement is that Scotland contributes massively to the UK's balance of payments. Our oil and gas exports are around about £30 billion. If that was taken out of the UK's balance of payments, the balance of payments deficit would almost double, and that would be very damaging to the sterling currency. So those are the reasons why I think it makes sense. And my final point would be this. It is as much Scotland's pound as it is the pound of the rest of the UK, and we'll be expected to take on our share of the liabilities of the UK. It's only right that we get our share of the assets as well.
Okay. Alistair Carmichael, do you believe it can work as simply as that?
No, I don't. I mean, basically, we all know that currency unions are very difficult to make work. You just need to look at what's happened in the Eurozone to see that. And effectively, what Nicola is offering to the rest of the United Kingdom is the opportunity to import into the rest of the UK the problems of the Eurozone. Currency unions only work if you can align your economies so that they go in the same place, at the same direction, at the same speed, at the same time. Now, if you're going to do that, then, to take your point, I don't think you've got a properly independent country at that point. Why would Scotland on day one say we are independent and then on day two hand over control of interest rates, of borrowing levels, of taxation and all the rest of it back to an institution in the rest of the United Kingdom? For the point of the rest of the United Kingdom, you would be asking them to underwrite banks and to have taxpayers in the rest of the United Kingdom stand behind the Bank of England as a lender of last resort in circumstances where they had no control over these banks. It's not in either party's interest to have it, and it just wouldn't happen.
OK, so when you say it wouldn't happen, if Scotland voted for independence, you're saying the Treasury, the Bank of England, the government at Westminster would refuse to countenance.
What you have heard, George Osborne has said that it's highly unlikely to happen.
That's a different from saying it won't happen.
Well, that is a thing that can only be said by the government of the remainder of the United Kingdom when it is constituted in that way.
Alistair Darling said it was logical and desirable.
No, actually he didn't. That's another misrepresentation.
He did.
Margaret will explain why in a second. But it's not just Ed Balls, it's not just George Osborne. Carwyn Jones, the First Minister of Wales, says he wouldn't want it. This is not just a contest between Westminster and Edinburgh. This is going to involve people in all parts of the United Kingdom. Nobody should vote for independence next year thinking that if they do so, they will keep the pound. On Tuesday, we should have heard what the alternative was. I think Patrick's maybe got quite an interesting alternative, but you cannot vote yes on the basis of keeping the pound.
Right, thank you. The man in the blue shirt there, you say.
Nicola Sturgeon mentioned France and Germany. That's the euro, with Germany very much the lead country. Is that not what we should be doing then, into the euro? And secondly, is Mr Salmon down in Wales to see if the Welsh Mint will print Scottish pounds?
This is because he's going down to Wales on Question Time, we think, next week. You're saying that the euro would be preferable to going into sterling. Eddi Reader, what do you think?
Well, I ain't a politician, but, you know, I don't have any problem with England, and I don't think England has a problem with us. The people of England and the people of Scotland are sane people. They wouldn't choose to have a fight about something like this. This is, once it's simply explained what the actual deal is, this union that we're supposed to have is, once that's explained to the English people and the Scottish people properly, by people with no agenda, by the way, anybody, once it's said what it is, and I did a bit of an investigation, I was neutral this time. Well, no, February. This time last year, I was neutral, completely neutral. I was a Labour traditional voter, and then I started looking at what this was that was floating into our laps, this referendum kind of idea. What is it? I like the union. What is this breaking upness, this separateness, this divorceness? I don't think it is that. Because I actually went and found out what our deal is. And our deal isn't that at all. Our vote doesn't affect what happens in the rest of the United Kingdom. Our vote in Scotland is generally centre-left. And the bottom part of England tend to vote centre-right. So therefore, we have to put up with that. And there was a time when they did go for a kind of a socialistic, socially useful kind of compromise with Tony and Gordon, but that had to go so far right that it was not the Labour Party that I voted for, and it wasn't what Scotland votes for. And Scotland votes for welfare, it votes for
I don't want to
people,
deflect you at this stage, but we're coming to this question about.
All right. Well, what I want to say is if we decide to be independent, I don't see us having a fight with anybody.
Margaret Curran, do you agree with her?
No, I don't. I makes interesting points, but I sadly don't agree with her. And I'd come back to Stephanie's point, because the currency is absolutely fundamental to the interests of Scotland. And I think really what's at the heart of what the SNP has proposed, and what really hasn't been explained at all, or we were promised all the answers in the white paper, and I don't think we've got them. Because to me, it's a very strange kind of independence that says we will have all our tax powers, we'll keep control of our tax powers, but our monetary powers, which determines our interest rates, which determines the mortgages we pay, which has huge implications for our economic interests, will be set by the Bank of England. The Bank of England is under the legislative competence of the United Kingdom, but under Nicola Sturgeon's model will withdraw all political influence in that. Now, at one level, I think that to me is a very strange form of independence. Why would we give away those kind of economic powers?
What is it that you say an independent Scottish government would not be able to do in your view, if it had sterling as its currency?
Well, it would have no influence over our interest rates and therefore our mortgage rates.
Independently already.
No,
by the Bank of England.
no. The argument is the SNP...
You say what? You set your independent rates?
Interest rates are set independently by the Bank of England, not by the government at the moment.
Under a mandate of the Chancellor
set for Scotland at the moment.
Because this is a very important point. I know we'll debate this as the year goes on, but this is a very important point because under the proposals put forward by the SNP, which their own experts have said it's stupid not to have a backup plan to this, but under the proposals from the SNP, they proposed to split tax powers from interest rates, and the interest rates would be determined by the Bank of England. The Bank of England is the legislative framework for the governance of the Bank of England is determined by the UK Parliament, from which the SNP want us to withdraw. To me, that gives us less.
What do you think they should do then, if they vote for independence? Have their own currency or go into the euro? What would you say?
With the greatest respect, I think the best way to keep the pound and to keep economic stability is to vote no in the referendum.
Yeah, well, you obviously think that.
That's the way to go forward.
OK, you stay up there. Let's hear some more members of our audience. You say in spectacles there on the right.
People are saying that, two panellists now are saying that we're going to lose control of the interest rates. That assumes that we have control at the moment. Yeah. In the TV in the waiting room, we had Mark Carney's announcement, and that didn't seem to get much past the property market in London. Yeah, so exactly. I'd like to know a bit more sort of for interregional cooperation rather than just attacking the Yes campaign.
OK, Annabel Goldie, can you answer that? Can you answer his point specifically, that interest rates are fixed not by the government anyway?
Well, I think interest rates come within a macroeconomic framework. We've seen that with what has been happening as the government has struggled to try and cut the overall deficit in the UK. The reason the government's trying to do that is, of course, as Margaret was indicating, to try and protect, for example, mortgage rates, try and make sure that interest rates are not leaping out of control and people are facing impossible bills to pay. But going back to the heart of this, Nicola used a very interesting example, I thought, to illustrate a currency operation, and it was the euro. Now, you know, I think most people would look at the euro with all the challenges it's been through recently and regard it as quite an instructive experience. And the first part of the experience that I'm very acutely aware of is, thank goodness we're not in the euro. But the other very instructive experience is, and this gentleman in the audience was correct, Germany actually controls the euro. It doesn't really matter what the other euro countries think. Germany is calling the shots. And Germany is determining what the borrowing and taxation levels are in these other countries which use the euro.
Is this a crunch issue for you, Annabel Goldie? The issue of currency?
I think it goes right to the heart, David, of the argument as to whether or not we should go for separation and independence, or whether, as Margaret was saying, to keep the pound, the best thing to do is to stay within the United Kingdom. I think currency, frankly, is about the most important thing that we can think about. It affects us all, whatever stage of life we're at.
And there's no way of not having sterling, which would work for Scotland, having its own pound, the thistle or whatever it was called, or the euro?
Theoretically, Scotland as an independent country could float its own currency. Every informed commentator says that would be a highly risky...
So this is not a crunch issue in that case?
Well, I think currency is a crunch issue, yes, and that's why I feel...
Why couldn't it float its own currency? I don't get
Well, because every acknowledged expert has said that in this day and age that's a very risky thing to do. I mean, you immediately place yourself at the mercy... Well, hang on a minute, Nicola, you've had an extensive say. The markets, David, would determine the worth of your currency. The markets would do that. You would have no control over that. What we have with the pound is an established, tried and proven currency, which actually has stood up well to the very considerable challenges which have confronted.
It's the markets that decide the value of sterling.
Yes, but the markets have made a good judgment in sterling, and that would be completely...
Why wouldn't they make a good judgment on Scotland?
Because there's no track record. The markets could say, we don't know what this currency is like, we don't know what the economic policies are like.
But we're not proposing that. I mean,
well, you're not proposing it, Nicola, but if you couldn't, in an independent Scotland, negotiate terms acceptable to you and Alex Salmond...
It would cost English businesses £500 million in transaction costs. Why would any Westminster
I'm going to go
want to force its own
Nicola,
businesses?
I'll come back to you. I'm going to go to our audience again. The woman over there on the very far left, you. Yes.
Right, I want to go back to Eddi Reader because I'm sitting on the fence at the moment and I can't make up my mind. There's a lot of scaremongering. You're saying all that there about money and euros and pounds, and it doesn't bother me about that. I really don't care. And Eddi, you said that in February, was it February you said?
Yeah, last February, yeah. But I was just musing on it, and I posed the question, what is this debate?
What's your...
But somebody obviously must have explained that got through to you.
Oh, yeah.
Has nobody got through? Nobody's got through to you yet about it?
Not yet,
no.
And all this sounds like bickering and going on about things that go right over your head. I mean, to get to the people that matters the most, you need to come down to their level.
And what would that be? Jobs and prices and housing and those sort of things?
Forget about money. Forget about... Well, we all need money, but...
I find it really surprising that you all clap that it's about that. Is it not about democracy?
All right, Patrick Harvie.
Is it not about...
Patrick Harvie.
As so often in this debate, I think there's a bit of truth on both sides of what you've heard so far. I've no doubt that in answer to the original question, yes, we could become independent and continue to share a currency, and I suspect that the issues which the UK government currently wants to present as an insurmountable barrier would give way to pragmatic solutions. Yeah. And so Nicola is right on that basis, but Alistair is also right when he says that if economies diverge, then holding together a currency union would be increasingly difficult. And one of the reasons I'm voting yes is I do want to diverge from the UK's economic model, the low-tax, low-wage austerity model that we're having imposed on it. And so, in the longer term, and it might be a matter of years or it might be longer than that, but I do believe that the Scottish Government should hold open the option of creating an independent currency, because otherwise a UK government would be able to impose limits on borrowing and public spending and services, impose some model of austerity on us. And I think we need to get away from that as urgently as possible. OK. I'm going to move us on because we've spent a quarter of an hour on that so far, and I want to get through 2 or 3 aspects of this. So with your permission, I'll move on to a question which perhaps will touch on what you were saying, madam, over there. Chris Mulholland has the question.
How will the Scottish Government accommodate the latest influx of European migrants in January, given the lack of jobs and housing?
Given the lack of jobs and housing here in Scotland, how will you... And the SNP says it wants to encourage immigration. How will that work? Alistair Carmichael.
Well, I mean, I think that we should be prepared to welcome people to come here from other parts of the world, especially from the European Union, if there are jobs and if they are coming here to make a contribution. I take your point that, you know, we still have about over 7% of our own people unemployed, so we should be looking at everything that we can do to get them into work. But the truth of the matter is that if whatever happens, we have an ageing population in Scotland, and it's the future, and this is going to be especially true if Scotland were to be an independent country. We will need more people of a working age to pay the pensions of people who are retired, because at the moment, the way things are going, Scotland is going to be in an even more challenged position than the rest of the United Kingdom in that regard. What do you make of what the Prime Minister announced in Westminster about all these changes on benefits, which you originally said it would put us on the wrong side of the European Union? I don't want to find myself in that territory. Have you changed your view now? Well, no, what I was asked about when I said that was if you made these changes solely in relation to people coming from the new accession countries, Romania and Bulgaria. These changes that are being announced today, which are pretty straightforward, they're pretty sensible managerial issues. If you come from another EU country, you are not going to be able to claim job seekers allowance for the first 3 months of being here. That will put us in the same position as Germany, the Netherlands and other places. I think that's perfectly sensible. Is that all right for Scotland? I have absolutely no difficulty with that. Is it all right for Scotland? Because the SNP says Scotland needs immigration, whereas the implication is that what Scotland would need would be people to come and work here and settle here and to contribute here. We know that. But I don't see that that's necessarily going to replace people claiming job seekers allowance in the first 3 months.
There may not be too much difference here between Alistair and I on this issue. I mean, I think the first point to make is we are a nation of immigrants. We're also a nation of emigrants. There are Scots living and descendants of Scots living literally in every corner of the globe. And I think the starting principle here should be that we should give people coming to live in Scotland the same welcome as we would expect and want for Scots going to live in other parts of the world. But there are big issues here that I think make for important discussions. I represent the part of Glasgow that has the biggest concentration of migrants from Central and Eastern Europe, Govan Hill in Glasgow, and there are challenges there. It's not challenges associated with where people come from, incidentally. It's challenges associated with the very significant and rapid rise in population in an area that was already very densely populated. So we need to make sure the investment and the services and the work done to integrate and make sure that people are welcomed properly and these things are catered for. We need to do that. But the bigger issue, I think, is about Scotland's future need for people to come and do skilled jobs here, to have targeted immigration, because we do have a big challenge of growing our working age population. Having an ageing population doesn't make us unique, and it's actually a good thing that our population is ageing. But we need to make sure that our working population is growing to support that ageing population. And some of the policies of the UK government, taking away the right of young people that we educate to stay here after they graduate to work by taking away the post-study visa, is just the wrong thing to do. So if we had control over immigration, we could put in place policies which are sensible for our economy, and that, I think, is one of the big benefits.
I want to go back to the question, if I may, because Chris Mulholland, you clearly had concerns. Can you just explain what your concerns are a bit? Because both these speakers have said, as far as they're concerned, everything's fine.
No, I've actually absolutely no problem with people coming here with something to offer. But it seems to be too easy to come into Scotland and the UK and just get preferential treatment over people who already live here. I think that's wrong. I've been in a situation where I've worked every week since I left school, 23 years. I couldn't get a mortgage. I went to the local council office and they more or less says to me, you're the wrong nationality for to get anywhere on the housing list. Forced me into an astronomical private let, which I can barely afford. I can't save up a deposit or nothing like that.
You're the wrong nationality in what sense?
That the immigrants are placed further up the housing list than people who already live here, people that are working here. I think that's wrong.
And thank you. And is that? Do you think that's the Scottish Parliament's doing, or Westminster's doing, or would be affected by independence for Scotland?
I think it's both.
Both. Annabel Goldie.
Well, certainly the issue is one reserved to Westminster, that's quite correct. And I think as both Nicola and Alistair were indicating, and funny enough I found myself in agreement with both, because there is an issue for Scotland, and that is we do know without a shadow of a doubt that our population, our older element of the population, is ageing proportionally at a greater pace than the rest of the UK. And we do, as one of the other questions indicated, have to give thought about, well, how do we support, you know, those who will have to have pensions paid, who will have other public service needs. And I think it is the case that we are a welcoming country. We're a welcoming set of countries within the United Kingdom, and I think we do need skills that are not currently available, and it's good to be able to encourage these skills to come to the country, and I'm delighted if people can bring these skills and can work. I mean, what Alistair was talking about was where people were coming and may very well have been expecting to go and benefit indefinitely, because that is the system of welfare provision. And what the UK government has said is, in relation to Bulgaria and Romania, no, you know, you're going to have to qualify for benefit, and you know, you're simply not going to get that, you know, after a certain time, right. And that's, you know, that's all about it.
The woman in green there.
My question to the panel is, instead of encouraging migrants from whatever country they come from, I know that we have to, under the EU rules, we have to let them come in, but instead of actively encouraging them to come in and bring their skills with them, why don't we concentrate on upskilling and training and investing in our own young people?
Absolutely.
Margaret Curran.
Yes, and the lady in green, if I may call you that. I mean, I think that's a very important point, and I do think sometimes the apparent failure to take action sometimes does cause that kind of conflict and tension around the debate on immigration. And I think it's really important that particular agencies who take over migrant labour are not allowed to continue to exploit that and perhaps undercut wages. And that's certainly part of Labour's approach to tackling immigration, and something we do need to tackle in order to go forward. On the general question, I think most people would accept that immigration in principle is a good thing. I'm the daughter of immigrants myself, but it needs to be managed and it needs to be fair and effective, and we should be clear about the rules that are applied to everyone, and the rules should apply fairly. And I have to say, I would be very concerned at any housing person saying, I'm sorry, you can't get a house on the basis of your nationality.
Do you think it happens, as he says?
Well, I'm sure the man's not a liar, so I'm presuming that that's the evidence, and I think that should be addressed. You know, and I'm sure I would have agreement from my colleagues that that should be addressed, because people should get housing on the basis of their need. They shouldn't get it on the basis of their nationality. Now, we do have an issue about migration in Scotland, and it does have implications for independence, I'm afraid, and we will need to think that through about borders and such like, and the rules applying to that. We do need to think about that.
Yeah. You, sir, on the right here.
Thank you. Talking of the borders, I've come up from near Gretna Green today, travelling up this afternoon, listening to the Richard Bacon show. They had several politicians and people talking on there about this very subject. And one of the things was David Cameron, the Labour politician, was saying that this policy he's bringing in for the 1st of January is a little too late. However, if the SNP do get the referendum and they start pushing all these, how Scotland's going to be wonderful, we're going to become the land of milk and honey. We're going to have even more people coming. And their point was, we will then sort David Cameron's immigration problem out, because they won't want to stay in England, they'll want to come to Scotland.
And are you in favour of that or against that?
I'm against it, you know, because we're the first line of defence in Scotland is down at the borders. And we're the ones whose houses are getting taken over. We're the ones whose job... Now, people may laugh, but the first place anyone who doesn't know where they're going, they filter out from the border. They don't go pick a point on a map and go, oh, I'm going to go to Auchternuchty or Aberdeen or Falkirk. They'll go, where do we go?
Patrick Harvie.
Well, I do think talking about the first line defence is a wee bit overkill. It kind of pretends that you know, foreign equals bad and that immigrant equals threat. And there are some real myths that need to be challenged here. Immigration contributes more to the economy across the whole of the UK than people receive in welfare payments. Recent immigrants are less likely than the settled population either to claim benefits or to live in social housing. Where there are problems around the supply of social housing, and there are, we should be investing in building more social housing. Where there are problems around public services, we should be investing more in public services. And where there are economic problems that lead to a lack of skills or employment, that's what we should be investing in.
Patrick, you're not persuading him because he's shaking his head as you speak.
Beg your pardon?
You're not persuading him because he's shaking his head as you speak.
We don't have the infrastructure to have thousands and hundreds of thousands of people that may come in. We're talking, these houses just aren't going to get made. There is not the brown belt sites to build these houses. There's not the schools in place. There's not the hospitals. There's not the fire service. There's not the police service. There is certainly capacity to be investing in social housing in Scotland for domestic need as well as for migration need. And that's something we should be doing regardless of the numbers coming in and out. Actually, if you look at the numbers coming in and out, and Nicola talked about Scots as emigrants as well, it's mostly the same countries that people are coming in and out of the UK to and from. So, you know, let's get this into a little bit of perspective and recognise that migration is as much an opportunity and we shouldn't talk about it in terms of
Eddi Reader.
Who's frightening you about this big influx of people that are coming in, these people that are going to need something from us? Who's frightening you about that?
It's not a case of who's frightening. It's a case of it's the reality. It's what's going to happen.
How do you know it's the reality?
Because we're a very prosperous European country. We are a very prosperous. And there are all the other countries, the 29 or whatever it is in Europe, there are a lot of them who are not as prosperous as we are. So it is just natural that people will want to better themselves. They want to upskill themselves. They want to financially provide for their family. There's nothing wrong with that.
And Mr.
But we've got
proposals on this.
But there's got to be the infrastructure. There's got to be the housing. And when that gentleman up there can't get a house, and he's lived and paid his taxes, he's gone to school, can't get one, and there's something morally wrong.
That told him he was back in the queue, he had to be fired. Whoever's told him that. Because
I agree, yeah.
You're making an excellent case that we need investment in infrastructure and services and housing.
Right.
What we don't need is Mr Cameron's suggestions that rich people should be able to move and poor people should be less able to move.
The woman up there at the back. On the left. I'll hear from you.
Surely if there's currently a question about our membership in Europe, if we were an independent country, if we didn't become a member of the European Union, there wouldn't be this issue over immigration, because the issue at the moment is migrants coming from the rest of Europe.
So you'd like to see an independent Scotland stay outside the European Union, would you?
Not necessarily, but at the moment there does seem to be a question about whether we would become automatically European Union members, given the comments from the Spanish Prime Minister this
And
week.
what's your view about that? Do you think it's likely that it won't be automatic?
I think it's a little bit like the currency debate, where it's something that people are putting barriers up at the moment, but if we got a yes vote in the referendum, it would become something that wasn't such an issue.
Margaret Curran, is it really possible that Scotland would not be allowed into the EU, in your view, as an independent country?
Well, I think it's not automatic. I would hope that Scotland would be could join the EU, and hopefully we would be welcomed into it. But the critical issue is the conditions that are attached to that. In terms of the rebate, in terms of open borders, in terms of the euro, other member states on whom we would need their unanimous agreement would put conditions on that. And it's the conditions that are attached to that that would materially affect life in Scotland going forward.
You think they might be different from the position now?
Oh, it could be very different. We might not get the rebate. We might have to apply to the euro, and the open borders arrangement that we've currently got, the opt-out in open borders, might not apply. So it's actually very significant, and there are no guarantees. And the white paper from the SNP have not given us any guarantees or answers on this.
Nicola Sturgeon.
To listen to Margaret Curran, you really have to wonder how 150 countries have managed to become independent since the end of the Second World War. On the European issue...
They clearly didn't want to join the EU.
On the European... Well, some of the members of the European Union are fairly recently independent countries, but on that issue, if we vote yes in September next year, we don't become independent the day after. There's an 18-month transition period. We're still part of the UK and, by definition, Europe. We negotiate the transition of our membership within that time. And we're not asking for any special terms. We're asking for the terms we've got right now to continue. And, you know, I think the bottom line is this. Is anybody seriously suggesting that Scotland, with everything we bring to the European table, wouldn't be warmly welcomed as a continuing member? That is simply not credible.
Secretary of State for Scotland, this is an endorsement of Scotland's strength.
This comes to the crux of it, actually, because Nicola says we're not asking for special terms. We have got special terms. If we walk away from the United Kingdom, we walk away from these special terms. That is the fact. That's what we heard last night from the Spanish Prime Minister. He told us, yes, of course, you can apply, but you will have to apply as a new entrant. And we wouldn't be able to get the same opportunities. We wouldn't be able to get the same opportunities that we currently have. And we got a pretty clear signal of that from the Spanish Prime Minister himself last night, because it's not in his interest,
Alistair,
looking to the Catalans and the Basques, to make it look easy for an independent Scotland to join the
I know he wants to send a signal to the Catalans, and he doesn't really support the idea that the Catalonians should be able to decide their own fate in a referendum.
Yeah.
But look, I thought the one thing on both sides, on yes and no, I thought the one thing we all agreed about in this referendum was it's the decision of the Scottish people, not the decision of the Spanish Prime Minister.
All right. Very briefly, briefly, what would not be available to Scotland that is available as a member of the United Kingdom?
You have to wonder if Croatia, for example...
Hang on. Let's talk about the United Kingdom.
Croatia has been told that she cannot have the same favourable terms that we have got, but she has joined anyway. So why would Croatia agree to us joining in special terms that weren't...
Well, what are these special terms?
The rebate on our budget contributions.
It's what we've got just now.
The commitment to join the euro. The ability to travel within the Schengen.
Exactly, we wouldn't even fulfil the requirements for you. The only risk to Scotland's membership of Euro is the in-out referendum being promised by David Cameron. That's the only risk to our membership.
Perhaps the rest of the EU might be willing to accept a swap of an independent Scotland for Spain or Greece.
All right. All right. Now, we must move on, so we've got many other questions, but I should just say, as always, you can join in the debate at home by text or Twitter. You know our hashtag, probably, BBCQT. You can follow us at BBC Question Time. Text comments go to 83981 is the number for texting, and use the red button. Let's take this question, I think, from Carol Fox, please. Carol Fox.
The one certainty of independence after March 2016 would be that Scotland would never again be ruled by a Tory government. Isn't that more than enough reason to vote yes?
So, Margaret Curran, does that put you on the yes side?
Well, there's a curious thing about democracy.
You're thinking about it, Margaret.
Come on in. There's a curious thing about democracy, and that is you can't always guarantee what governments are going to be in the future. So let me say to you, do not make a decision, the momentous decision that we have next year, just on the basis you think you can't ever guarantee Tories will never have power and influence in Scotland. Because I tell you, sometimes when I look at Alex Salmond and see some of the things they're doing to the poverty programmes in Scotland, I have my doubts about some of the things that are currently happening in Scotland. They've got a lot of Tories on their side as well.
Listen, if Scotland decide to vote Tory, then Scotland decide to vote Tory, or my granny's bingo party. It doesn't make any difference. The point is Scotland has the choice.
I do believe that Scotland's got a choice. I just don't...
Not all the time. Not all the time.
Eddie, I agree with you on so many things, but I disagree with you.
Are we a country?
Of course we're a country, and we're a very proud nation, and we're all very patriotic to Scotland. You could never question...
Then why do you ignore the mandate of the Scottish people, then?
Can I just say this point? Please, I'm not ignoring the mandate. No, I don't accept that. Please let me...
You know that we vote centre-left all the time, constantly.
Eddie, please let me make this point.
Why can't we have the government that reflects us? Why can't we do that?
Please let me make the point.
There's something wrong with it?
Can I tell you, the last 16 years, Scotland has voted Labour, and Scotland got a Labour government, because Scotland does actually... And we do get to vote in the Scottish Parliament.
Like Labour. Sort of looked like Labour. I had to lean so far to the right, that it was unrecognisable.
The man up there at the back.
And it went to war with Iraq. I voted for that, Labour. I voted for you.
Up there at the back.
And look what it did in terms of poverty and public services, Eddie. You cannot deny that.
Hold on. Enough.
They did their thing, but
Eddie, enough for the moment, please. I want to... No, Margaret. Eddie, please, you're having a conversation among yourselves. There are 4 other people here and 120 members of the audience. And I want to go to the gentleman up there at the back, and then I'm going to come to Annabel Goldie.
I think the real reason Margaret Curran doesn't want independence is because she realises that Labour will never be in power again in the UK. 50 or 250 MPs.
That they'll never be in power in the UK. How many elections?
They need the Scottish vote to get into Westminster.
Four governments since 1945, I think. Labour governments have been supported by the Scottish vote and wouldn't have been there if it hadn't happened. Annabel Goldie, what do you say to this question, that the Tories will be dead meat in Scotland if Scotland votes independent?
Well, that's very encouraging. It implies that there is a present state of life which I know there to be. I can understand why the lady poses the question, and I can understand why Eddie launched into her impassioned diatribe. I actually think that there's something much deeper to this about the whole constitutional debate, because actually there are many, many reasons why people may form a view. Now, we've listened to some of the views from both Nicola and Eddie and other members of the audience who favour independence for Scotland. And they can have that view. They're entitled to hold it. I respect that. What I would argue very, very strongly is that if you do believe, and according to the opinion polls, an awful lot of people do believe this, if you do believe that this extraordinary and unusual socio-economic and political union, which is the United Kingdom, has actually worked well for the last 300 years, and that doesn't mean you always get the government you want at Westminster. For, 13 years, I didn't get the government I wanted at Westminster, but I still believed in the concept of the United Kingdom, because I actually think that has served Scotland well. And there's a lot of evidence to demonstrate just how effective that union has been. So what I'm saying is, I think there are deeper and broader and bigger issues that should determine Scottish minds when they make that decision next year. For my own part, I've never said Scotland couldn't be independent. Never said that. Theoretically, Scotland could be independent. That's actually not the question. The question is, which arrangement suits better Scotland, suits Scotland better? And my argument is, I think we have the best of both worlds. I think we have the benefit of a strong Scottish Parliament, which looks after our domestic issues, and we have that framework of the bigger partnership, which gives us arenas of influence on the international stage. Good heavens, I've seen that to very good effect just in very recent days, whether it's the talks that were taking place about Iran and how we try and stop Iran's nuclear programme, whether it's all the help we're managing to give in the tragic situation confronting the Philippines. We're able to do all that. And we would not actually have these arenas if we were independent. So there are bigger, broader issues than whether you like or don't like the Tories in Scotland.
OK. The woman there on the right.
If Scotland...
No, sorry, no, I was going to the woman in dark blue there. Yes.
No wonder people become disinterested in politics when we've seen a display like this evening, just in the last few minutes. People want the facts that they can then make up their own minds. We want the truth. We want to know what is going to happen. So please...
OK, so you can have power with uncertainty, or you can have no power with uncertainty, because nobody can tell us what's going to happen if we stick in the status quo.
But we've got 16 and 17-year-olds who are going to be getting the vote for the first time. They need to be directed. They need to be helped to make up their mind.
And I agree with you.
Therefore, they need the truth. They need the facts.
You can't turn on the TV.
Can't have people bickering.
No, you can't turn on the TV or open a newspaper and get the facts of our deal. I had to find it in the internet. I had to look.
Do you believe there is a truth to be got at?
Yeah, I think
no, I'm not talking to you.
Sorry.
Do you believe there is a truth to be got at, or do you believe it's a matter of judgment, which nobody can actually ascertain at this stage for certain one way or the other?
I don't think we've heard any truth from any of the politicians on this.
If I can just respond to the lady about information. We've published the white paper. I hope people will read it. We've tried to answer as many questions as possible, and we'll answer more if we can. But people are going to have to look at the arguments and come to their own decision. On the democracy point, I mean, I'm, as you've probably gathered, no fan of the Tories, but for me this is not actually an anti-Tory point, it's a pro-democracy point. Never in my life has Scotland voted Tory, and yet for more than half of my life we've had a Tory government. That's just not democratic. That can't be right. With independence, we don't get landed with governments that we've rejected, and I don't understand Labour's position on the referendum, because actually on a lot of social and economic things, Labour supporters, SNP supporters probably want much the same things. We want a fair economy, we want a decent welfare state, we want to see the back of nuclear weapons, and we're far more likely to get all of these things through independence than Labour teaming up with the Tories in a better together campaign.
Wouldn't the argument you put about being represented by Tories when you know, for a long period of time and not getting what you want, wouldn't that equally apply to parts of England that are consistently Labour voting and, and support Tory governments, and parts of Britain that are consistently Tory voting and support Labour governments? I mean, why should Scotland be so special?
My gran was from Sunderland, and that part of England, I'm sure, doesn't like having Tory governments any more than we do.
Not suggesting independence for Sunderland.
Well, my gran, I think, would have, if she was still here, would have probably argued that we should include them in the referendum. But anyway, that's a different story. We are a nation, and we have the opportunity next year to assert that and to be independent and to take our own decisions. That's what it's about. You know, I believe passionately in the social, cultural, family union we have with other parts of the UK, but I want us to be politically and economically responsible, and we only get that if we're independent.
Alistair Carmichael.
I hesitate to do this, but the lady in blue there I said that, you know, this was bad for politics because you were all bickering. I'd have to point out, Eddie, that it was the one non-politician in the panel who was in the middle of the bickering.
She's passionate about it. That's a good thing.
Listen, I think we're in danger.
It's where I live. It's my home. This is where I live.
Me too,
you know.
actually.
Well, I live here too, and
I live here too, and you know, I'm
Good
a Scot.
for you. I'm passionate about it.
I'm passionate about being a Scot, and I'm also passionate about being
we all
British.
love Scotland, right?
So it is possible to have more than one national identity. We've lived with that for long enough. I think part of the danger here is that we are confusing what or how you consider things in a referendum with how you would consider them at an election. Because at an election, if you make a decision and you decide to vote for a government that you don't then like, you can change it at the next general election. If we choose the wrong, if we make the wrong decision next September, if we vote for an independence that we then don't like, there is no going back. And I'm afraid
Has any
Nicola
independent
just
country
seems,
ever wanted to go
I'm
back once
afraid
they've become
Nicola just
independent?
doesn't seem to quite get the grasp of democracy here. In my community, I live in Orkney. We have never voted for the nationalists.
You're the one imposing a Tory government on Scotland right now.
We have never voted for the nationalists, but we've still got a nationalist government, and that is how democracy works.
Are you saying it's undemocratic to have a vote on independence?
No, absolutely not.
You sound as if you are, because you say once it's made, you can't go back, and that's not...
And who says we can't go back? You know, who says... What,
well, so, I mean, is that now the prospectus that you're being offered? Because I have to say...
So we're going to have never-ending.
No.
No,
what I'm saying is, why haven't we got the power to make the decision if we speak to the English about what kind of alliances we're going to have
let's remember there are more people in the United Kingdom than just the English and the Scots. There's the Welsh and Northern Irish as well.
That's right, there are. And I think they could do with a little bit of a rejuvenation of our electoral system as well, thanks.
The woman there in the third row from the back.
I just want to make 2 points. You don't need to be a nationalist to vote yes.
Absolutely.
And Mr Carmichael, in terms of democracy, we have just had your coalition government introduce fees for employment tribunals, which restricts the rights of working class women to make equal pay claims in Scotland. I don't believe anyone in Scotland ever voted for that.
If you, if you want to change that, if you want to change that, then you vote for other parties at the next general election who will change it.
We need to hear from Mr Harvie, who we haven't heard from on this question.
Thank you. Thank you very much. Look, I want to start actually by agreeing with something that Annabel from the Conservatives and Margaret from the Labour Party said, that this is a deeper, longer-term issue than simply who's going to form the next government. And I hope that if you're undecided out there, or if you're sat at home watching the programme and you're undecided, I hope that you don't make this decision on the basis of who you think the next government will be. I've made my decision on the basis of a political landscape that I think needs to be fundamentally challenged. I think the UK's political landscape, whichever party is in power, has been delivering minor variations on a centre-right theme for far, far, far too long. It's the opportunity for fundamental change. I think we're going to get that change if we decide to take responsibility for ourselves and build our own political culture in Scotland, our own political landscape, one that reflects the values of the Scottish people. That's not easy, and it's not a guarantee, but I think the only way to guarantee failing to achieve that is not to even try.
The woman in red there.
We're talking about democracy here, and democracy for Scotland and Scotland's future. Democracy is something Scotland is very passionate about. And I would like to ask Alistair Carmichael to explain the democracy of him bolstering a Tory government, imposing a legislation in Scotland like the bedroom tax, or like what the lady at the back's just mentioned, fees for job tribunals, etc. How can he possibly justify that to the Scottish people, that his colleagues in the Liberal Democrats are imposing a coalition Tory government in Scotland that Scotland didn't vote for? Where's the democracy?
It is the government of the United Kingdom, and I would just remind you that the two parties in the coalition across the whole of the United Kingdom got 57% of the votes at the last election. I think we're perfectly entitled to govern.
Let me take another question. Another point. Yes, you said in the centre there.
Yeah, it's for Margaret. Margaret, for years, the Labour Party in Scotland says don't vote SNP or the Tories will get in. So why should we vote for the Labour Party?
Because there's a basic premise that I would put forward in terms of the argument. We're doing this throughout the referendum. I think we've got a strong Scottish Parliament, and that's where Scotland votes. But we also, because we've got a shared interest with the rest of the United Kingdom, I don't believe Scotland should pull away from that because of our family, because of our connections. And I think the best way to do that is this alliance that Eddie talks about. I think that should be governed by a democratic structure. So you have a democratic structure in Scotland, and you have a democratic structure for those shared interests. Now that's no. Let me finish, Nicola, because I think that we have to, make sure we put forward these arguments to get a chance to do it, so that you can have a strong Scottish Parliament, but then you also, where we have a shared interest, be it the currency, be it some of the macroeconomic issues, be it around some of European membership, defence, foreign affairs. I think that's best governed by having a UK Parliament that has political representation from across the UK and is accountable to the people it represents.
I have to stop because I want to take the woman there. And then I want to go to the last question. Yes, up there.
Could I just ask the panel, if we vote for a yes vote next year and the SNP, for example, didn't get in, is there anything in the white paper and all these promises that's been given to us in this huge document yesterday that any of the other parties would accept, such as renationalisation, getting rid of Trident, all this stuff? Would they take that on board, or would a completely new paper be written up?
Well, all the political parties will put forward a manifesto in the 2016 election, and I think that's the most important thing. The yes or no choice on independence is simply about that question. Should Scotland govern itself, make its own decisions decided by the Scottish Parliament, and the political balance that the people of Scotland choose to put into that Parliament?
But there are things, hang on a second, there are things in the white paper that the SNP have put forward that sound like political proposals, like childcare, which wouldn't seem to be about... Is that what you mean? It wouldn't seem... You can't be voting on...
It's like a manifesto for an election rather than for independence.
Yes, what do you say to that? Because there are things in it that are not yes or no to Scottish independence.
No, we've been very open about that. So there are some things that are very important in terms of the fundamentals of independence, like the currency and the EU. But we have very openly said that we want to demonstrate and illustrate for people how you could use the powers of independence to make Scotland better, to grow our economy, to make Scotland fairer. That's why we've put forward policies and proposals that we would implement if we were the government. But you're absolutely right.
Nicola,
we might not be the government,
and it would be for others
to decide what they wanted to do.
On childcare.
That's because we don't get the money.
Exactly.
I mean, I'm sorry, but we've managed to do it in Westminster. Childcare in the rest of the United Kingdom. Childcare in the rest of the United Kingdom is far ahead of where it is in Scotland. So you have the power, you have the money. Why don't you just get on with it?
Because we're going to save money on Trident to invest in childcare. We can only do that if we're independent.
We're here in Falkirk. We've had a lot of questions about Falkirk, and I want to take just one question from John McCall, please, on an issue that's been exercising the political classes and people here. John McCall, can we have your question for some weeks?
Yes. My MP, Eric Joyce, has brought shame on Falkirk. Should his constituents and myself be able to vote for his dismissal?
In other words, should you be able to get... Eric Joyce, who's standing down in the next election, was fined £3,000 and banned from pubs and given a 12-month community order for committing an assault on another MP. Should you be able to get rid of him in this period, or should he be able to sit there? Eddi Reader, what do you say?
Well, I think that there's lots of stuff goes on that we don't really get a clear picture of here. I know that there's definite agendas all going on. I definitely think there's been some sneaky behaviour happening, and I'm not really clear what it is, but I certainly don't want to be trashing all trade unions because people make mistakes, or that Eric Joyce guy, I don't really, because I don't live in this part of the country, I don't know much about him. I know he punched somebody in the face, but I'm not really clear what is actually going on between Unite and, and the Labour Party here.
Well, Unite accused of fixing the choice of the next candidate. Margaret Curran, perhaps you should come in on this straight away.
Yes, can I agree with you that Eric Joyce did bring shame on Falkirk and brought shame in the Labour Party, and we were right to suspend him. You raise a really interesting point about how you could then deal with that should it go to the wider population, both in terms of perhaps recall, and I think that was in legislation. I think the Lib Dems supported that, but it didn't come forward ultimately in the House of Commons. It becomes a very complex process, and that would need to be discussed.
Has Labour come clean about what's gone on in the selection process with Unite?
Well, bear with me on this one. When the evidence of concern became public in terms of what was going on in Falkirk, the Labour Party took immediate action to deal with that. We put the constituency into special measures, which is essentially where you suspend the local Labour Party and you bring in senior officials to look at that. And what we did do is ensure that the members, through that investigation, when that came to a conclusion, that the members who are now voting in the new selection procedure all predated any of the concerns that were raised with us.
Has Labour come out with a clean face from this, do you think?
Well, I would have to say... Well, it's not been our happiest experience, I'm not going to deny that.
Is it over now?
No.
Is it all been cleared up, in your view?
Well, let me be honest with you. At all times, all parties have problems with candidates on certain occasions. That has happened to different parties in Scotland in the recent period.
Right.
And of course you must take action. Of course you must investigate it. What's important is moving forward from this. And it's the action we take to support the local party, to address the needs of the people of Falkirk that you rightly raise, and make sure that we've got a good candidate going forward.
Annabel
we
Goldie.
have got good candidates on the shortlist to go forward.
Annabel Goldie. I'll try and come to you, sir, if I can.
I think, sadly, what's happened to Falkirk is very, very unfortunate, and I'm sure that Falkirk feels that it's been very unfairly besmirched, and I think that's regrettable. But I think it's regrettable for another reason. I'm a politician, like everyone on the panel with the exception of Eddie, and I'm acutely aware that the public's opinion of politics and politicians is not high. And when something like this happens, it merely reaffirms public perception. They're all a bunch of chancellors, a complete load of opportunists, being paid by the taxpayer to do whatever they like. And I think that's profoundly
What about the way Labour's handle a selection
Well, I was just
process?
going to come to that. There are broader strands here, and I think two things would have helped. I think there's a bad smell hovering over all of this, and I don't think the bad smell will go away unless whatever that report was that the Labour Party commissioned is made public. Why shouldn't it be made public? You've suffered, you've been the victims, but there's another aspect which is troubling, David, and we can't... Let me say I believe in trade unions. That may sound improbable to some of you, but I do believe in trade unions, and I think responsible trade unions have an enormously important role to play. But I am deeply concerned with the way in which Unite has operated. I am acutely aware that since Ed Miliband became leader of the Labour Party, 75% of Labour Party donations come from trade unions, and the biggest element of that is from Unite. And I find that, frankly, unhealthy. And Margaret may say, well, what about the Tory party getting donations from big business and all the rest of it? All of that is made public, but there's no dependence to the extent that Labour is dependent on the trade union movement. So why can't Labour disengage itself from Unite, come clean, say, this was a mess, we hold our hands up, here's what went wrong, we're trying to put it right.
Thank you very much, Annabel.
Why is Ed Miliband too weak to do that?
In the second row from the back.
Yes. This whole thing stems back from the time when the Labour Party disenfranchised Dennis Canavan, who was an excellent Labour MP for this area. But the situation is that Eric Joyce didn't make it any easier, because in fact, when the whole thing started, he should have stepped down immediately.
And where does it go from here?
Well, I think that the thing has been started by the fact that we've got, if you like, a clean slate coming up with the new selection of the new three candidates. But I think that the whole thing is our MP, Mr Joyce, should have stepped down immediately, and to his shame, Falkirk has had a bad press because of that.
OK. I'm going to have to stop there. I haven't been able to bring in all the panel, but we have really run out of time. So I've got to stop, or I shall be hung, drawn and quartered. Which I wouldn't like. Next week, we're going to be in London, in East London, as a matter of fact, and it's on the day of the Chancellor's pre-budget report. And politicians are going to include the Chief Secretary of the Treasury, Danny Alexander, David Davis for the Conservatives. We have Mary Beard coming on the panel, and Amanda Platel. The week after that, we're going to be in Swansea. Now, if you want to come either to East London or to Swansea, apply to the address on the screen there, our website, or call 0330 123 9988. If you've been tuned to BBC Radio 5 Live, the debate goes on Question Time, Extra Time. In the meantime, here in Falkirk, my thanks to our panel and to all of you who came to take part in the programme. And until next Thursday, from all of us here, good night.